Welcome to today's explainer. We are about to unpack one of the most intense, gripping, and honestly controversial political blueprints ever created. I want you to imagine, just for a second, trying to solve the ultimate political nightmare, complete societal collapse. How far would you actually go to restore order? Would you willingly give up your freedom if it meant saving your life? Today, we're diving deep into Thomas Hobbes's monumental work, exploring his political philosophy and exactly how he tried to engineer a fail-proof system to keep humanity from totally destroying itself. So is a bad government better than no government at all? Seriously, think about that for a second. If the alternative is absolute chaos and violence in the streets, would you accept an oppressive regime just to know you're going to survive the night? That incredibly high-stakes question isn't just some dorm room philosophical exercise. It is the beating heart of everything we're about to look at today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the fear of anarchy, order over liberty, the authorization theory, the ultimate limit, and finally, the scholars' debate. Let's get right into it. Part 1, the fear of anarchy. To really understand Hobbes, we first have to understand the absolutely terrifying historical context that shaped him. He wasn't just writing in a vacuum. He famously claimed he was born completely enveloped in an atmosphere of fear. The trauma of the English Civil War just deeply, deeply shook him. He looked at the world around him and diagnosed the core problem: divided power. He realized that whenever power is split, whether that's king versus parliament or church versus state, the inevitable result is bloodshed. For Hobbes, the ultimate political threat wasn't a tyrant. No, it was anarchy. It was the complete collapse of society into a war of all against all. Moving on to part 2, order over liberty. Because his baseline fear was that total chaos, Hobbes proposed a harsh but kinda logical trade-off. For him, the first question in politics isn't how good is the government, or is it democratic, or is it fair? The first and really only question that matters initially is there an order at all? He concluded that an absolute, indivisible sovereign is absolutely crucial. Why? Because even the worst, most oppressive, systematically structured regime completely beats the bloody chaos of a civil war. Divided power caused the war, so indivisible power has to be the cure. But wait, what actually happens to our freedom in the system? Well, in chapter 21 of his famous book, Leviathan, Hobbes defines the liberty of subjects, and it's an incredibly narrow, negative definition. He argues that freedom is literally just the absence of external constraints. Basically, the sovereign can control almost everything, and whatever tiny little spaces are left over where the law is completely silent, that is your liberty. It's not about what you're empowered to do, it's just about what the sovereign hasn't bothered to regulate yet. Which brings us to part 3, the authorization theory. All right, here's where the explainer takes a brilliant plot twist. How on earth does Hobbes justify this massive, crushing absolute power? He actually does it in chapter 16 of Leviathan, titled Of Persons, Authors, and Things Personated. This specific chapter introduces a critical nuance that completely elevates Hobbes beyond just being a simple apologist for tyranny. It addresses that central tension of state versus people head-on. And this illustrates his core argument perfectly: the huge distinction between the author and the actor. Hobbes says the sovereign isn't some external alien force just imposing its will. Not at all. The sovereign is an artificial person. The citizens themselves are the authors who grant the authority, while the sovereign is simply the actor or the representative carrying out their script. Therefore, every single action the absolute sovereign takes is technically an action authorized by the people themselves. It's like the sovereign is just wearing a mask crafted by the citizens. So the strict transactional logic of this state-building blueprint breaks down like this. Step 1, citizens authorize the sovereign, giving up their natural rights to govern themselves. Step 2, the sovereign uses that absolute combined power to protect the citizens from anarchy and from each other. Step 3, because of that protection, and because they are the literal authors of the sovereign's power, the citizens are obligated to obey. It firmly ties the absolute power of the state to the formal consent of the public. Part 4, the ultimate limit. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, but what if the sovereign goes completely rogue? Well, Hobbes actually built in a strict boundary. The entire system boils down to this single, crucial idea: obedience in exchange for protection. The state has no independent purpose. There's no divine right to exist just for its own sake. Its entire legitimacy rests on one thing and one thing only: the safety and well-being of the citizens. Because the whole deal hinges on obedience for protection, the fail-safe is built right in. Your right to self-preservation remains completely supreme. If the state fails to protect you, or even worse, if the sovereign actively threatens your life, your obligation to obey instantly dissolves. Boom, the contract is broken. You absolutely do not have to just walk quietly to your own execution. And that leads us to part 5, the scholars' debate. It is so interesting to see how totally divided scholars are when reading Hobbes. On one side, Michael Oakeshott remarkably reads Hobbes within the individualist tradition. That means he sees the system as being built by and for the individual's ultimate benefit. He argues that Hobbes isn't just about brute force. The sovereign represents a rational will and human artifice. It's a logical solution to a very human problem. On the other side, C.B. Macpherson fiercely critiques this, warning that Hobbes' system is fundamentally dangerous to civil liberty. Macpherson points out that the so-called consent in the author/actor dynamic just hides an unequal pact, where the individual has absolutely no real choice. Reading these two perspectives together gives us a perfectly balanced view of the text. So, let's summarize the evaluation here. On the pro side, Hobbes offers incredibly practical logic derived straight from the raw reality of conflict. I mean, when you look at modern failed states where order has just collapsed entirely, Hobbes' arguments about the necessity of a central power become terrifyingly relevant again. On the con side, his framework heavily undervalues civil liberty, government accountability, and democratic participation. From any modern democratic viewpoint, those are some severe, glaring limitations. If you take away just one thing from this explainer today, let it be this key nuance. It's just too simple to picture a scale where the state is heavy and the people are light. Yes, Hobbes is heavily state-centric, for sure, but you cannot forget the authorization theory. By defining the citizens as the authors and the sovereign as the actor, the entire massive weight of that absolute system remains formally tied to the consent of the people. It's a complex, sophisticated mechanism, not just mindless tyranny. And that brings us to our final thought. When you look at the world today, do modern failed states prove Hobbes' ultimate fear of anarchy was right all along? When the chips are down, do humans always prioritize order over liberty? It's an uncomfortable question, but it's exactly the kind of question Hobbes forces us to confront. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the balance of power in